Hi everyone, welcome to the second webinar of the LGPC and SUPC annual Responsible Procurement event. I'm Marisol, the Responsible Procurement Lead at LGPC, and I'm here with Rob, the Head of Procurement Services at SUPC. This webinar is about the government modern slavery tool and the Greater London Authority's experience using the tool. So we have Jonathan Farrimond, Client Delivery Executive and NQC, and Stuart Coates, Responsible Procurement Manager at the Greater London Authority, presenting today. So, Jonathan, you are first.
Many thanks. Thank you, Marisol. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so just to give a quick overview into myself and our roles. So we are the service providers for the supplier registration service for government. It's where the modern slavery assessment tool sits that we'll look at and discuss today. With yourself set up with buyer functionality, you can create a campaign at any time in order to begin and invite suppliers in order to complete a modern slavery assessment tool on the supplier registration service. And that's what we come in for any kind of technical assistance as well, showing you how to use the platform and make use of any results as well. I'll just give you a bit of an overview into that, unless Marisol, would you like me to just move on to Rob for like an overview and then come back to myself, or to just go straight into showing what the about the tool and a little bit about the platform as well?
Yes, you can start with it.
Lovely, thank you.
That's fine. Just to let everyone, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions to the speakers.
That's right. I'm just using the one screen myself, so can everyone see this okay as well? This modern slavery assessment tool campaign functionality overview.
Yes.
That's good. Fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, just to give a bit of background. So it's a 2015 draft policy from the Home Office, the modern slavery assessment tool. So they kind of sit over ownership and edit rights and that kind of thing, to wanting to update the assessment. It's not been updated since 2019, but it is a Home Office initiative in its first instance, and Crown Commercial Service kind of work very, very closely from their perspective, also on modern slavery. But in terms of the actual policy and the draft policy behind it, that was all Home Office back in 2015. It's got 6 key areas within the assessment, all broken down into these different areas of governance, policies and procedures, risk assessment, due diligence, training and KPIs. And each section is scored out of 100 to give an average theme score at the end, that the supplier will get a score out of 100 at the end. So buyer, whoever that's shared with, and supplier who completes it will have full visibility of those scores as well. There are 35 possible recommendations that could come out of it. So effectively, as you're working through the assessment, you might get you might come to a question which, say for instance, let's say early on in the assessment, I believe it says, is your organization required to produce a modern slavery assessment? You might say no or not required, which is fine. It might just be based on the size of your organization, kind of no legal obligation for you to do it based on the contracts that you hold with your buying organizations as a supplier. You might say no, not required. That will still pull up a recommendation basically to say that you've got it might be recommended for you to improve upon that by producing a modern slavery assessment each year. So it'll mark that down as being like a recommendation. So when you get to the improving stage of the assessment, it will come up and say that. You can still say yes, no, or not applicable as well as a buyer. And then there are obviously the band ratings as well for these scores, as mentioned earlier, where it's 70 to 100% is green and 0 to 19% is red. And then based off that, we have like a buyer's evaluation guidance. So how you can how buyers can, how would you say, communicate with suppliers around their score in order to potentially improve for next time, that kind of thing. And this is a link to the website right down here as well. So I'll just pause there before going into the site and showing you how to set up a campaign. Marisol, would you like me to move on to that straight away? And I can't see if there's any questions raised either, but I'll jump straight into the platform if required as well, just to show how to set up a campaign.
Yes, that's good. I'll let you know if there is any question.
Lovely, thank you so much. And you're okay seeing this now as well, is that right? This is the replica site for the supplier registration service. The URLs are slightly different. You don't need to worry too much about taking notes or getting step by step for what I'm about to do as well, because it will all be included within the slides that I'll send across after this call as well, or will be distributed out haven't probably got all the invitation list, but can be sent to Marisol to distribute forward if needs be. But you can see this site, is that right, Marisol, at the moment, where you can see your dashboard for where it says your dashboard and managed category here. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see the dashboard here.
Wonderful, that's amazing. So for anyone who's not registered, I'll just quickly sign out and show you what the site looks like. So as I mentioned, this is what the homepage looks like. The URL will be slightly different. This is a test site we use for demonstration purposes running through the product. You can register here where it says register as a buyer, or register here as well, and it'll take you to a buyer link. If I just click on sign in here on the top right, because then I am registered. Registration process is all very quick and simple. It'll be manned by a team at this side and sent off to the applicable user manager for them to be able to confirm your access, given the fact that the organization is likely to have been registered already. We just need to get in touch with a user manager to sign that off. So once you are signed into your dashboard, you've got these 5 tabs here: locations, products, profiles, contracts, and suppliers. For the main part, these first 4 tabs are usually kind of mostly related to suppliers, because that's kind of where the assessments sit that you need to complete, the modern slavery one being underneath the contracts tab. And you, from a perspective of looking at your supplier results, or alternatively creating a brand new campaign, you just click on manage category here. You've got the option for add category on the right hand side. This will be where you create and set up a new category. So if we call it GLA 2022 MSAT campaign, don't need to worry too much about the content of the category name or the description. That is something which you will only see and the supplier won't. So if you're worried about what to input in there or anything like that, don't overthink it too much. It's not what it's not what the supplier is going to see. So you don't need to worry about it coming across on any kind of invitation. This is integral here, though, this category content drop down. These relate to the tabs that we saw earlier. So depending on the type of questionnaire which you want the supplier to complete relates to which category content you want to drop down here. So as I mentioned, the modern slavery assessment sits underneath being a supplier contract. So you just click on supplier contracts here, and then when you scroll down and have the option to choose campaign here, you can see the starting questionnaire is the modern slavery assessment. It's the only one that's a contract questionnaire, so it'll be there. For instance, it does happen quite a bit where I think it's default set as supplier locations, so there's going to be no questionnaire underneath there because there's no questionnaires relating to where a supplier would update their location details. But for supplier contract, you can see it automatically populates to MSAT version 2, and that's the only assessment there actually is. So then if I put in, and you can see the start date for this is the 22nd of November, and the end date as the 17th of January. So it will always start from the date of which you click on the link, or click on add category. You see that's 10:39, so it's about 2 minutes ago. But you can change that to whenever you want. And this date, again, none of this has to be hard fixed. If you input all this information and click on save or click on add, you can go in and edit that information later. So we'll just do that now. So this one's called GLA MSAT 2022. I'll just click on add there. You can see if I search and decide, I've got quite a lot of categories set up from having done so many demonstrations. I click on GLA 22, I think I called it, didn't I? GLA 2022. There you go. This is the one we've just created, telling me that I'm the category owner. Got no contracts in there yet, as you'd expect, because we've not actually invited any suppliers yet. This is quite integral, more so for the supplier to remember than yourself. But this invitation code here, 5-digit alphanumeric code, which is created off the back of always creating the campaign. So that R37YW, you've not selected that. It's just for the supplier to input when they need to. You've got the option then to edit this information. So if you want the campaign to start a little bit later, you're not quite ready for it to start yet, you can say, we'll go, actually, I'm happy for it to start today at say 1500. That gives us plenty of time to get our invitations list ready. And then as soon as that date hits, that time hits, any invitations which have been uploaded will send out to suppliers. And again, this end date can always be flexible as well. You set that end date as a certain date, and then if you want to extend it based on, say, needing a few more supplier responses come 17th of January, you can do that as well. So if I just click on save here, and I've still got that GLA one here, 1 minute. There we go. And if I click on invitations, and I've got the option right here on the right hand side to upload supplier invitations, I can download a template of this. And the only thing that's mandatory for you to include within the template is the actual email address of the suppliers you want to invite. So if I just quickly go to where that template will be. And here you go. So this is what it looks like. So it's got quite a fair few tabs on there, but you don't need to worry too much about these. You can use them if you wanted to, populate these with the scope. So, you know, being for a contract, specific contract, or the organization as a whole that you're requesting, maybe a description, all these supplier contact details and telephone numbers, they are completely optional. You don't have to worry too much. You can use them later on as tags within the template if you wanted to amend the template and send it off to supplier. But I think given it being a modern slavery, using a default campaign invitation template that's there, which I'll show you, is kind of quick and straightforward and easy to use and doesn't complicate things too much. So that would probably be the recommendation from this side, at least. So I've got MQC template. And as long as I've put in a valid email address here, we're good to go effectively. So bear with me one moment. And I've just downloaded that now, and I can upload that information into here. And as you can see, we've returned to the invitation screen. It said that I've added jonathan.farrimond@nqc.com. It's got an orange R to symbol that the account is registered on the system. That means that within the system somewhere sits that email address, and that user set up and signed into the system, set up and registered on the system. To show you a little bit more about the various stages of invitation codes, you've got these ones that are in gray, orange, and green. So gray means that it's a brand new email address. It's not registered on the system before. Orange means it's an email address which is registered on the system, just that the user hasn't input an invitation code as of yet. And then green is that it's been accepted. So that means that the code has been used by a supplier, and that these ones that have used it and are in green status, their assessment could be in any various stage from responding, improving, or completed. And you can edit a user's email address at any time, and the invitation will resend out on its next one. So if you realize you've got the email address wrong at some point when you've uploaded it, don't worry too much. You can just edit that at any time and save it. And then also you can also upload any invitations again if you wanted to. Best not to upload a full supplier list again. You don't want to send out the same email address, send an email to users that, you know, say for instance, you wanted to add a couple more to your list that you had previously. I wouldn't upload the same list again because it will duplicate, it will send across. So have a look at ones that are already on there and then just choosing to add in some more, and you can keep topping them up as you go along. So if you do miss out of some suppliers on the first time, just download the template again, add in the next amount of email addresses and upload again, and those additional 3, let's say, will be added onto this list here at the bottom. So, you know, you can add suppliers as you go along. It doesn't always have to be in the first instance. And then once that's been set up, you can see this is a previous one that we used. There's a code here, and that the 7 suppliers have responded so far. That 7 contracts means that 7 assessments have been shared as part of this campaign. You just click on the title of the campaign, it'll take you back to your dashboard, and you can see all the supplier responses in that category underneath here, regardless of the stage. As soon as they've used the code, the assessment will be anywhere from 0 to 99% of the way through, and you've got visibility of it at every stage along the way. Like this one's used the code and it's shared a view, but probably hasn't completed that many questions. Or actually, bad example, this one's updated it numerous times. So I'll just go back to my dashboard and find one where it might just be in the first iteration. Let's say this one. Perfect. Yeah. So this supplier has used the code. No questions have been answered yet. So you can't see anything because they've not answered any questions, but you've got the same level of visibility of they have, all the way up until somebody who's actually completed the assessment, like this one here, Evolutionary Systems Company. You can see that it's in completed stage. You can see their score, the risk flags that are associated. So as we mentioned earlier, risk flags, all sections will have risk flags, and based on the supplier response, they might get a risk depending on if they answer a question to be negatively, or if there's a chance that it's bad practice when it comes to modern slavery, that it would be included within here, and a description of what each one is as well. So you can do an export of that, and it'll tell you about KPIs, excuse me, training, due diligence, assessing and managing risk, that kind of thing. Sorry. If I just go back to my dashboard again, you can still see, yeah, you've got all these various ones improving, so you can get them all in one place and have a look under category analysis, and all this information's here of whether or not they've completed, or they're in improving, or they're in the responding stage as well. And you can dive into each assessment individually from the analysis screen, or you can have a look at all of this stuff in more detail as well, where it'll contain all supplier information in one place. This is if you want to kind of do a deep dive on an analysis to have a look at supplier responses that, you know, match up, or the similarities between your suppliers and risks in your supply chain for this specific contract, for instance. You can have a look at all the suppliers' risks in one place. So all of those negative risks that they've answered, they'll all be stored in one place as well. So hopefully that kind of clarifies, at least at this stage, kind of the how the assessment works, or how the issues are and the themes in and around risks and things like that. Does that help provide clarification as well? That's all.
Yes.
Is anything about that which needs covering? Again, I appreciate I kind of went through that quite quickly, so I'm happy to slow down and focus on any more aspects, or if there's any questions in regards to how the suppliers use the invitation code or how you view it all in one place, I'll be more than happy to answer those queries.
I have a question. If the supplier has already done this, so they can just share the like with the invitation code, yes? Like if they
That's
have done
correct.
it before.
That's absolutely correct. Yes. So if they go to, let me just find that one of which I've just completed, in fact, or sorry, where I just uploaded my own invitation, that GLA one, that created a code, which I obviously uploaded my email address so I can actually use that code in real time now. So this R37YW, like I said, you don't need to worry too much about knowing the code. We have these, you'll see here, it says edit. When you set up the campaign, we've got this default campaign invitation template here that's used. It's really, really simple. You can have a look at that, what it looks like in advance if you want, by just going to manage your templates. You can create a brand new template if you want. So here where it says add template, you follow the guidance, you could basically create, you see these are test ones that I've created along the way to what's the word, to customize and call it what you like, in the title and any of the information if you wanted to call it, or you could just, the default campaign one we created basically for the sake of ease, especially for something like MSAT. It's all very simple, and it basically says, if you're not registered, register here, log in here, this is the buyer who wants you to share, and this is what the code is, and all that will be input for you automatically, and it will just look along these lines. This is obviously with the hard coding. I've just sent it to myself as well, so you'll be able to see that it's really, really simple. Just saying like, this is just all the styling behind it, but it will just have really, really simple easy to follow instructions on it, of which I might even have a version here. One moment, I can just quickly show you. Bear with me.
So I think that is responding to two questions here, Nadia and Helen. So yes, if a supplier has a response already, they can just share with you, so they don't have to do this again and again.
That's quite correct. Yes. So instead of them having to do it again, especially if they've just done it recently, and that code, I think I just copied that. So say this one evolutionary system, they've already done an MSAT assessment for a different campaign. If I sign in here and go to my dashboard, this is what a supplier's dashboard will look like. So very similar to the buyers, except it says buyers here and they've got their buyer relationships rather than a suppliers there. But you can see any assessment which they've completed is underneath here. So say, for instance, they've completed this assessment and they've shared it with another buyer already. Just click on enter invitation code on this contract. There's the code of which they've been asked. It's probably invalid because I think I set that opening time as being later on today. I think it was about 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock. But you can just use the code at any time, enter invitation code on contract, enter the code here, and once it's done and the campaign's open, they can just share it that way. So saves them a lot of time. And also if the supplier wanted to say share, they go, I've done the majority of the assessment, or I've done it all previously and shared it. This one's for a slightly different contract, so I need to tweak my answers slightly. And if I don't want to do the whole thing again, they can click on Start Modern Slavery Assessment here. They've got an option to reuse existing answers. They can choose any assessment that they've previously done, and it will populate with information across that point. So if I click on that top one, you see it's populated a brand new assessment with information I've previously submitted against a different one, and they can go into any question and edit that slightly, and then share at the very end by entering the invitation code on contract for that assessment as well, and then that will share with GLA Group too. So as you can see, there's plenty of for suppliers to be able to kind of tweak their answers accordingly if they need to, and then share that information with GLA as well at any time.
I think there's a couple more, but we can come back after Stuart does his presentation.
Sure, absolutely. I'll stop sharing my screen then if you like. That is obviously a full campaign overview. When I send Marisol these slides, my email details are on those slides. And as our support team numbers at any time are also down here at the bottom. So if you're having going to be any technical issues or just kind of want a refresher on what I've taught you, you can reach out to me directly. My phone number, as I mentioned, and email are on the slides. This will get through to our support team. And if they can't answer the query, they can redirect it to myself or another member of my team as well. So you won't ever have to wait too long if it's about getting access or just kind of navigating through the system. You'll always have someone on hand, such as myself, to be able to assist in that element as well. So, but yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's usually a lot quicker than I kind of do that. So I appreciate there might have been areas where I've kind of breezed through it quite quickly. and maybe, you know, quite a lot of questions, or you're still trying to formulate exactly what to do. Well, the good news is anyway, the slide deck which I have, which will be sent over, is basically everything which I've covered off here, just in step-by-step instructions with a lot more guidance there as well. So you can always refer back to these as well, or just reach out to myself if you need to as well. But I'll hand over to Stuart, and thank you so much for your time, everybody, as well. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
No problem.
Thanks, Jonathan. Really, really interesting as always. And yeah, I second that. We definitely used the slide deck that John sent around to help us with our setting up our campaign. So yeah, they're really useful. Right, let's try and get my screen shared. How's that looking?
Good. Good.
Everyone can see that, yeah? Good.
Yeah.
Cool. So I can't see anything, including the time. So jump in if I'm going over time or anything, Marisol. I want to leave some time for questions. So yeah, so as Marisol said, I sit in the GLA Group responsible procurement team. So we're responsible for delivering the Mayor's responsible procurement policy through the functional bodies that sit under the Mayor, obviously City Khan at the moment. We're hosted in TfL, but we do sort of work across the group that includes TfL, the Met Police, the Fire Brigade, and a couple of other development corporations. I won't go into this in loads of detail, but just gives a bit of context. That's our responsible procurement policy, of which the sort of modern slavery work and the modern slavery assessment tool that we're rolling out, that I'm going to talk about today, sits in that theme at the bottom of the screen. Promoting ethical sourcing practices, which is focused on labour rights, human rights, and modern slavery. So the RP policy specifically, and I will get onto the MSAT, but just a bit of context, references the need for us to adopt things like the ETI base code, the Ethical Trading Initiative base code, in all of our contracting activity. Identifying contracts of spend where there may be a high risk of human rights abuses. So that's very much where the MSAT work fits in there, because as I'll get onto, we've done that risk analysis to determine those relevant suppliers to be invited to the MSAT. And we're also looking how we can improve supply chain transparency, working with external organizations. So the ETI, SEDEX, Electronics Watch, that's all covered and referenced in our policy. So we've got that really strong sort of link through, as I know LUPC do as well. So that just gives us that sort of impetus to work on this. And across the group, sort of been publishing modern slavery statements since the start of the Act. I think we're on number 7 now. So we've got that really that good link in, and we've referenced the MSAT and our progress in our statement this year. And we've got some quite public targets on addressing, which I'll get onto. We then have our implementation plan, which sits under the policy, which basically gives a bit more detail, a bit more meat to the bones on sort of what we're actually going to do to implement the policy. There's a lot, as I'm sure you've got as well in sort of your statements and in your policies, on increasing awareness and training of commercial teams. So we do quite a lot of capability and capacity building through the supply chain school and doing all of that sort of training of our commercial stuff, but also outside of our commercial teams as well, to really help spot the signs of modern slavery. We're actually extending that to our suppliers to help them increasing their MSAT scores and managing their risk. So, but again, I'll get onto that. We've got a practitioner learning group that we're calling the Modern Slavery Delivery Group, that again helps with the sort of the governance of it, but also tracking progress more broadly on modern slavery. But we also use it to track the progress of it's mentioning sort of key programs, of which the MSAT is one of our key programs, because we do have those targets in there. So it's really good to have that group to sort of bring our various functional bodies together and sort of discuss their successes and challenges to our campaigns. I've mentioned that we sort of collaborating with other partner organisations, and we've also got some sort of standard modern slavery approaches to our commercial development arrangements, mainly sort of property buildings and property management, that's sort of going in as standard in our tender processes. The RPIP, the implementation plan, then references specifically the MSAT. So we're publicly on the hook for this kind of stuff now. And those on the screen there are sort of the targets that we've set in place there. So I'll just go through those so that we're sort of keeping it on subject with the MSAT. So the top one there is quite a high level commitment, but really the MSAT sort of facilitates this. So it's sort of improving performance of our key suppliers, and as well as those that are assessed to be medium and high risk, to eradicate the risk of modern slavery in their supply chain. So what we're trying to do, which hopefully I'll get onto as well, is supporting our suppliers with the scores that they have in the MSAT to help them actually improve that performance. So obviously their risks are obviously our risks as well. They are shared risks. So any sort of lower performing suppliers, we do want to be there to sort of support them and help them and see how we can sort of collaborate to improve those scores. The process that we're following with the MSAT is sort of outlined there, the sort of three-step approach. So we started off using the Cabinet Office risk assessment template to risk assess our key suppliers. It says key suppliers, but we started off at that because we do have quite a large supplier base, but then also using sort of recently awarded contracts to understand where they may fit into sort of higher risk spend categories to sort of make that that risk assessment in its totality across our supply base. We then take those that are medium to high risk and invite them through the campaign as John laid out. So the various functional bodies all manage their campaign separately, and we then invite them on a local level. So we may have some shared suppliers across the functional bodies, and we just make sure that we, as has already been mentioned, they only have to share that response once, and we include that in all our comms. So they may get duplicated comms from the functional bodies, but it gives us that sort of unified I guess approach to our shared suppliers. And then also we've got here that they'll complete it, and then they'll have an improvement plan by October. A little bit cheeky, I suppose, because the improvement plan actually comes from the MSAT itself. They do get some areas to focus on improving their scores. So by virtue of sort of completing the MSAT, they'll get that improvement plan that we can then use, whether that's on a local level through contract managers or in a central at a central level through ourselves, of having those discussions. It's really actually quite useful to pick up those discussions, because that's where we really get to the bottom of the work that our supply chain are doing. We've done it in the past with analysing modern slavery statements, and I've sort of sat down with suppliers before to discuss their modern slavery statements. But I think most of you on the call will know that the statements have quite a variety of quality and content, but actually the modern slavery assessment tool, obviously because they're all following a standard approach, we can really see, and we get the recommendations from the MSAT itself, so we can pull that out and use that as a tool to develop in our suppliers practice in that area. So it's really useful to pick up those discussions that way. And then this is the stretching target that doesn't quite keep me awake at night, but maybe will later down the line as we get closer to March 24. We have said that we want all of our suppliers that are completing it to achieve a minimum of 70%. And that 70% is reflected. You get a sort of a RAG status, red, amber, green, and to get a green, that's you need to score 70%. So that's our logic there. So in terms of the sort of process that we followed, I've sort of separated it there into sort of preparing, because there is a bit of preparation in terms of setting your campaigns up and understanding the timescales and comms and things, and then through to launch and managing. So starting with the preparation, we've obviously a little bit similar to LUPC, although I don't intimately know how you guys work, but from our perspective, we've got about 4 or 5 functional bodies to be engaging with to agree an approach. So we making sure that we're supporting our the functional bodies and having a consistent approach to our suppliers. So we had that initial internal engagement. We've done similar workshops like you're doing today with John through NQC to understand the functionality and requirements. So yeah, John's been really useful to help us get off the ground there. To probably set up our campaigns and also learn from other bodies that might be doing it, and learn from their mistakes or their successes as well. Like I said, we carried out that risk assessment to identify our sort of in-scope suppliers across the group, which we got to about 150 between the various bodies, and then spent a bit of time developing the comms content to be sent by the MSAT. So you've got standardized comms that get sent by the MSAT, but we actually decided to make that a bit more personalized to our organization, just to try and increase that response rate and make it sort of appear that it's coming from us. It's really useful functionality having that. It has a you can agree how frequently the reminders go out, which we started off a bit more infrequent, and then as the deadline approached, we sort of changed that to make the reminders more frequent. Again, that's quite useful where potentially we don't all have time to be chasing up suppliers every week or so. So that's been pretty useful. Then we launched it. So we launched a campaign around January, February 22, between the bodies sort of within a few weeks of each other, and our campaign closed officially on the 31st of March, although it's still open, and we are still chasing suppliers to make sure that we get all those completions. But we did set a deadline to help with that sort of initial tranche of suppliers. We did then launch it with actually, obviously, the comms that come from MSAT come from a sort of like no reply NQC or whatever the email address is. So we actually supplemented that with comms directly from the organisation, so from each functional body, just so it gives it that sort of more local feel, so they can really understand that request is coming from ourselves and it is important to us as well. So it just sort of has that unified sort of comms approach. And then we hosted a supply workshop. Sorry, John, if I'm giving you more work here, but we had a workshop a bit like this really, but for our suppliers that have been invited. So after they'd received that invitation and probably thought, what on earth is this? They wanted to understand a little bit more about it. So John went through the tool, and we gave a detailed presentation on how it fits in with our responsible procurement program, and how that might help them with managing their risk on their contracts. So again, that was a really well attended session and really useful to have that engagement with our suppliers. And then where we are now with the sort of managing phase. So like I said, we've got our modern slavery delivery group, and on a sort of periodic or a sort of more of an eight weekly basis, we have a dashboard to track those responses and also tracking the scores. So we use that from NQC, but we've got a sort of offline spreadsheet to sort of start compiling all those scores and those responses so we can see where we're at. We're following up with suppliers to increase the response rate, and as I said, sort of discussing any scores that we've got in, particularly where they may be lower scoring than we would like. And there is a fair bit of ongoing support with NQC, where suppliers may sometimes there's joint ventures, there's parent companies, there's accounts that are set up in different names and things like that. So John's very helpfully helped us with setting up those accounts. What we're doing to try and help our suppliers, so there's kind of two-pronged approach with getting all of our suppliers to complete it, but then also getting them their scores up to a certain level, is hosting a couple of due diligence workshops through our relationship with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. So we've got one in December and one in February, as a sort of, as I mentioned before, a bit of a support to those suppliers, rather than just sort of seeing a poor score and asking them to improve it, actually helping them there. So they're sort of 3-hour due diligence workshops that we're opening up to those suppliers. And as I said, we're monitoring progress at our internal delivery group, and slowly beginning to put some requirements into relevant contracts where potentially we haven't had any engagement on this, and the relet's coming up. So putting in a requirement to fill out the MSAT within 30 days of contract commencement. I know I think the Met Police, or I think it's the Met Police, have actually included in an SQ response for one of their tenders to actually ask suppliers to submit for information only, submit their MSAT response score at SQ stage. There's a couple of sort of ways that we can embed that into the tender process as well. So this is my final slide before we get in. Happy to take any questions. So sort of some sort of figures where we're at, where our success and sort of challenges to date. So like I said, 157 that we've invited to complete. So far we've got a 52% completion rate. So a bit of work to do to get those suppliers that have not responded, of which we've got a good sort of 60 that we've not heard anything from. I know some of the bodies are sort of just picking up the phone and speaking with suppliers, starting in TFL to sort of see how we can raise that via contract discussions, because although this is sort of corporate level, at the same time, we are essentially saying these suppliers have a high or medium risk on their contract with us, and no response to a request like this, which really should only take them about an hour or so to complete once they've found the right person in the organization, it doesn't really demonstrate that they're managing their risk appropriately on our contract with us. So, we started off potentially with a slightly softer approach, but maybe we now need to start looking at sort of really talking about this from a risk management perspective with those that haven't responded to us. And some, yeah, we've got 15 that are in the process of responding, and then looking at scores, 45 of our suppliers out of the 81 have scored above 70. So a decent percentage there that those have completed. Obviously, we would expect those that have responded already that are potentially doing some good work in this space. So it sounds, potentially those that have not responded are the ones that would score lower, and maybe and some conversations I've had with suppliers around their potential unwillingness to share their score with us, or not unwillingness, but unease to share it with us. And it's really important to make sure that we're really clear on those discussions with suppliers that this isn't a condition of contract for us, but like I said, it's a way of demonstrating that they're appropriately managing those modern slavery risks, and that's really important. So yeah, we've got sort of that two-sided approach that we're looking at the moment. So increasing that response rate, really important, and increasing the scores. And we've got a couple of ways of doing both of those things, because yeah, we need to get those completions. Some of our suppliers that have completed have scored quite poorly, but to be honest, I think if they're forthcoming with this, I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm certainly hearing from suppliers that I've known are high risk, or categories that I know are high risk, but we've not really done any work in this space before. So actually having those responses on the dashboard that John has sent has been a really good step in the right direction, and gives you that platform to start having those discussions with suppliers that you might not have otherwise raised these topics with before. So yeah, it's good that they are being transparent with us. I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure hopefully there's a few questions in the chat, and yeah, happy to pick them up now.
Thanks, Stuart. Yes, we do have a few questions for both of you. So I think this one is probably, there's more coming actually. So I think this is maybe for Stuart. Do you recommend obtaining MSAT for every supplier you purchase from in an organization, or only high risk categories, high spend, high volume?
Yeah, so we've just done it from a risk approach, so high to medium risk. So very much aligning to the spend categories that are in our modern slavery statement that we've disclosed as being a high risk. We wouldn't do it for every organization, just because it wouldn't necessarily be relevant for all the organizations, and we don't want to sort of overburden suppliers with sort of requirements that aren't necessarily relevant. So yeah, we're focused on medium to high risk suppliers, or at least medium to high risk categories of spend, and then that alongside with their assessment score and enables us to properly manage that risk and understand if the supplier themselves are a high risk, whether they're managing that appropriately or not.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. I think this can be for both. So you did mention something, Stuart, but what supplier webinars are being done to promote this system?
Yeah, so maybe we can both answer that, but we, like I said, we sort of opened, we organized a webinar like this to our suppliers that were in scope. So once we'd invited them, we then followed it up with that webinar that we put on offer. So we put that in all our comms. So I think that would sort of be down to yourselves to organize that, rather than NQC running regular ones. I'm not sure, John, if do you run regular sort of generic webinars, or is it always on a local basis by organization?
Local basis, yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, just upon request, really. If you can get like a number together like this is obviously a very hefty, large size, but we wouldn't necessarily just do them on a month and kind of just say, okay, come and join, because we like to also tailor it specifically to the buyer and organizations doing it, rather than different buyers from different like sort of parts of the system, Department for Education, NHS all joining at once. So yeah, no, we'll just conduct these sessions upon when requested, and find availability as well. So yeah, not any kind of routine ones for everybody. That's right.
Thank you. Is it free for all organizations to use?
Absolutely, yeah, it is. Yeah, one of our free services on the system. You just there might be I think everybody in here should be fine, because we'll get you set up with the right permissions, and I know your organizations are already registered. It could be brand new organizations that need to set up MSAT campaigns. Might take a little bit longer for getting the approval from CCS for them to do that. Crown Commercial Service would be in a Crown Commercial Service product, and us applying the correct licenses and things like that as well. But it is a completely free service for both buyer and supplier. That's correct.
Thanks. We have one here. Do the scores give a value below which we will not be able to use them?
Do the scores give a value below which we would not be able to use them? Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something we've been speaking about internally. Obviously, we set that target for 70%. We have had some lower scores in there. We haven't made a decision on internally whether there's a sort of, it certainly isn't a threshold at the moment. Obviously, we've got that target March 24 to hit 70%. If suppliers haven't engaged by then, or their score is particularly low, then I don't think, yeah, I think we'll make a call from there, basically, whether we need to take maybe a stronger approach through the tender process. But at the moment, we're not looking at low scores and saying we can't do business with this organisation. But certainly, it's I guess a reason to then pick that up locally with contract managers, because I sit in the centre of the organisation, so I'm not sort of engaged with every contract locally. But it's a reason to sort of, you know, pick that up locally to understand their policies and practices in the first instance.
All right, thanks. I think this can be together. So is this currently sent to all suppliers by CCS, for example, or by safety criteria? And then Helen is asking, will the UK UPC be asking all contracted suppliers to complete the tool? That's removing the need for all institutions to do this. So I cannot talk for CCS, of course, but we don't. I think we just start LUPC. We just start using this a couple of months ago. So we just create the first campaign, but we use it for just one tender. At the moment, it's around 20 suppliers, and we just closed the campaign like 2 weeks ago. So I haven't had time to look at the responses. Maybe this is something that Rob can take back to.
Yeah, I think, Helen, it makes sense for us to try and coordinate where we can. I'd link it back to a couple of the more recent questions that's just been posted about the level of resource that's required to sort of keep the assessments refreshed and reviewed. But I think where we can try and work together and ensure that there isn't replication of activity, we'd certainly seek to do that. I can't say it will happen imminently, but it makes absolute sense for us to try and do that, and to us to evaluate what's the best way of doing it, whether it's running it, perhaps as Marisol's alluded to, on a framework by framework or campaign by campaign basis, or we seek to gradually apply this across those frameworks that would deem to be, using the sort of analogy that Stuart's described, more high risk. But I think it's a case of, the point is well made, we need to reflect on that as part of the responsible procurement group discussions.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Is this tool only suitable for suppliers who surpass the legislative threshold of 36 million for Mars labor reporting? So I know I asked, so I ran the campaign, and there was, I think, maybe one or two that were below, so they don't have Mars labor stamp because they don't need to sort of. And when that happens, I think their score is something like improving, so they won't get the full thing, even though maybe they have things in place that are good. So that was my experience, but I haven't actually looked at that. I don't know if it's Stuart, do you have suppliers that were below the threshold, or Jonathan, any experience with that?
We didn't look at the threshold. I mean, by nature, a lot of our suppliers would fall under that, because lots of sort of like infrastructure construction suppliers. But you know, we included our uniform supplier, for example, and I don't know what their threshold would be. It'll be a slightly smaller contract than some of the bigger ones. So yeah, it's not linked in, as far as I'm aware, John, to the 36 million sort of reporting requirements in the Modern Slavery Act. At the end of the day, if the contract itself is a high risk, then the size of the organisation is slightly irrelevant. Obviously, we potentially would expect them to have less, because the MSAT questions are quite about sort of like, you know, risk assessments and KPIs and processes and things like that. So maybe an SME, a smaller organisation, has less of those in place. But then part of the functionality of the MSAT is actually then useful for those organisations to say, well, they might not be producing a modern slavery statement, so they might not be sort of doing this as business as usual at the moment, but actually filling out the MSAT then gives them I guess a best practice checklist of what they should be doing to reach that score. So it's a useful tool for them to progress their work in that space, basically. Yeah.
Correct. And yeah, from our perspective, that's right, Stuart. Yeah, we don't look at and say, oh, you're only, but 36 million. Okay, just you guys do it. That's fine. Your organizations do it. A lot of SMEs and sole traders and whatnot. I mean, first of all, as part of certain tender requirements from other buyers, they might say you need to submit an MSAT assessment by this date. They're not caring too much about the size of the organization and requesting to complete. It's useful to have that information regardless of the organization's size anyway, and it is designed to be as dynamic as possible. I mean, you probably would work through it as an SME and smaller organization and think these questions aren't quite as applicable to me as you would think, and some larger organizations might go, of course we have those, so they're used to filling out these assessments in the past, so it might come easier to them, and smaller organizations might struggle a little bit more because of the wording of the questions and the fact that it's relating to modern slavery and it's a one-man band type operation. But there's definitely nothing stopping them, and a lot of buying organizations don't seem to mind whether or not it's larger organizations or smaller suppliers doing the assessment as well. So it's a free for all, at least on our site, for everybody doing it, and there should be nothing stopping you regardless of organization size from being able to submit the assessment as well.
Thanks, Jonathan. This is for Stuart. How many members of the staff and what roles do you have to do the follow-up of suppliers not completing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So not that many. And once we get to that stage that we're basically at, we would have been at sort of earlier in the summer, where we've launched a campaign, we've done our comms, we've basically got those that are going to respond in the first instance. Then it is a bit, and that didn't take loads of resource to get it set up, because I there's automated comms through the system and things like that. But from there, you do kind of need a bit of resource to then start getting on the phone to suppliers and sort of chasing from there. So, I mean, the delivery group I was referring to, there's one person from each organization. So we're 4 or 5 people. I know some organizations have said that haven't had the time to start chasing. Some of them have just started chasing. So yeah, and to answer your question about what roles, we all sit in responsible procurement. So it's the responsible procurement leads from the organisations, or the modern slavery leads if they're slightly different. So yeah, I guess the chasing side of it does require a bit more hands-on work, but that's why we're potentially considering seeing if I think a lot of our contract managers, for example, aren't fully aware that we're doing this in the centre with suppliers. So it might be then you can start picking that up with contract managers internally and sort of saying, your supplier is considered medium to high risk, they haven't completed an MSAT, can you raise this locally and give me, provide me with the feedback? So then you're sort of managing it via contract managers and through the processes they've already got in place. We're yet to do that, but I think that's probably a good approach to sort of help with resources.
Thanks, Stuart. I think we're running out of time, but this is maybe for Jonathan. Could this same functionality be used for carbon net zero questionnaires? So I know this was developed by the government, so it's still
yeah. I mean, we have a similar. It's for a number of our customers. We do what's called the CSER questionnaire. It's a corporate social responsibility questionnaire split up into 8 or 9 different modules. Modern slavery is actually one of them, and then on top of that, we have carbon, waste and water, gender equality, diversity, green and government commitments, all what was once a big assessment, all split down into smaller modules in and around those specific areas of corporate social responsibility, of which carbon net zero, obviously I know a big government push. We updated that assessment specifically last year, or a number of our assessments, to add in that question about zero net carbon emissions. So we've actually got that functionality in those questionnaires as well. It is one of our paid services, paid licenses to be able to use that specific. It's one that was kind of designed in house here and sold as a product, whereas MSAT, being more of a government initiative, kind of that one's a free service on a free tool to use as well. So, but yeah, we do have that equivalent there as well for those corporate social responsibility questionnaires.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to finish the webinar now. We have another one in less than 10 minutes. So thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Stuart. We're gonna be sending the slides to the attendees. So if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to Jonathan or Store yourselves, and I'm sure they will be able to help you with more information.